Okay. Yes, this is strange, and not having a mask is strange. But it's lovely strange. My name's Mary Ann Stansfield. I live at 653 Stanford Drive in Slough, and I'm here to comment on the Westmont development. Our property backs up to 3 lots on the south end of the development, lots 21, 22, and 23. In fact, we're the only homeowners on Stansfield that actually live in the homes that back up against the property line. The other 3 homes on Stanford are all student housing. And I've spoken with Kyle Van Leeuwen a few times, and he has been helpful and very kind. We're not against the development, and we feel the property owners have every right to develop. We just want to make sure that it is managed in a thoughtful way that is fair and that considers the impact to our established neighborhood. And we also want to be good neighbors as well. We do take issue with the fact that prior to the last meeting, we were not properly notified. The meeting was held May 26th, and we didn't receive our postcards until the first week of June. Excuse me. My husband and I received 2 notification cards postmarked June 4th, and I'm happy to leave one with you all for record that the process was not adhered to. If you would like, I have them with me. We're not implying any kind of purposeful deceit or anything like that, but we just want to share that it is disconcerting. In light of, excuse me, SB 9 that is quickly moving its way through the state legislature, we want to better understand how many homes will be allowed to be built per parcel on once SB 9 passes. 23 homes can become 46 with the ADUs that are already part of the project, but will SB 9 make it 92? We are worried about those types of happenings. I also want to comment that we noticed a new or updated map document in the EIR online that addresses the drainage easement with more specifics as discussed at the last meeting, and we thank you for that, or staff or whomever did that. And we look forward to addressing more items once this project is back on the agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's the only one that we have for public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So then the next item is the consent agenda. It has the minutes of May 26th. Are there any comments from the public on that? I can see 2. I guess not. So could we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as they stand.
And I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Well, it's not bad for a chorus. And any objections? No. So it passes unanimously. So the next item is the start of public hearings, and the first public hearing item is, I've got to read a couple things about public hearings. So any court challenge to an action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the City of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Consultant and project presentations are limited to 6 minutes. So with that, the item tonight, 4A, is a review of the draft environmental impact report prepared for the 600 Tank Farm Road project. So the project before us is to hear an update and to review the draft EIR. So would Assistant Planner Kyle Bell please present the report?
Thank you, Chair Jorgensen. We do have our contract planner, John Rickenbach, who's the lead on this project, will present the staff report.
Okay.
Thank you, Tyler. Mr. Chair, it's good to be in a live setting again, so this is nice. So tonight, what we are in the middle of is a CEQA process, California Environmental Quality Act. We have a draft environmental impact report out on the street. And tonight's a workshop to take input on that, on the 600 Tank Farm Road project. What I'd like to do is to walk you through a little bit about what the project is, so everyone's familiar with that. and then hand it over to Chris Burzbach from Rincon Consultants, who's the lead preparer of the environmental impact report, to report on the contents of that document and the findings of that. And after that, give you an idea of what the process is at that point, and then take public comment. Tonight is not a night about making decisions or recommendations or even considering the project or its merits. It's really to take public input on the environmental impact report, and for us taking a lot of notes, which will be responded to in the final EIR. Again, this sort of is our overview of what we're doing here tonight. I'll talk about the project a bit and then hand it over to Chris. The project, first of all, is a 280-unit residential project. It's really a combination of high-density units and mixed-use units, 240 high-density and 40 mixed-use units, and 12,500 square feet of commercial office space on an 11.7-acre site adjacent to Acacia Creek, generally north of Tank Farm Road in the vicinity of Santa Fe, just west of Acacia Creek. There's about an acre of off-site transportation improvements that are associated with that project, and it's all within the airport area specific plan and consistent with with it, except for the fact that we do need to look at a rezone to allow for this to occur. The entitlements that we're talking about here, it's a general plan amendment to change the land use designation to allow that project, a rezone from business park to CS, a specific plan amendment to be consistent with this project and make it congruent there, a major development review to allow for the 27 new structures that would be part of the project, a tentative parcel map that creates 11 lots and 280 condominiums for the purpose of the project. The location, as I say, is right there off Tank Farm Road, and the project itself, from this graphic on the right, you can see it's a more north-south oriented project on the west side of Acacia Creek. You'll also see some of the yellow line includes some areas on the periphery of Tank Farm Road, which includes some improvements to Tank Farm and Santa Fe to allow for the project to occur. We'll get into that in a bit. What's around the site, Damon Garcia is to the north, the creek is to the east, undeveloped land and Tank Farm Road to the south, and the Chevron property to the west. This is the site plan, and north is to the right of the screen, and it lays out, generally speaking, to give you an idea, the primary access would be taken off an extension of Santa Fe from a new roundabout, which would be created there at Santa Fe and Tank Farm Road. Generally speaking, the structures in orange are all the housing associated with that. The structures in red, especially near Tank Farm Road, is the mixed-use portion of the site where commercial would be as well. Here, the roadway improvements we're talking about, again, the extension of Santa Fe to the north side of Tank Farm Road and an ability to turn around at the end, the bulb out there. The roundabout's an important feature that would be required as part of this project, and some of the right-of-way dedication that would be necessary along the extension or along Tank Farm Road to accommodate the project here. The phasing is set up in such a way, two phases, 124 units in the first phase, and then the commercial and the remaining 156 units in the second phase, including the mixed-use residential component, with the main phase being in the center of the project and the second phase both on the north and south ends of the project. So that's a very brief overview, and that's spelled out in more detail in the environmental impact report. And that's where I want to hand it over to Chris here, who's going to walk you through the CEQA process and what the EIR says.
Thank you, John. Chair Jorgensen, Vice Chair Quincy, and Commissioners. My name is Chris Burzbach. I'm a Senior Environmental Planner with Rincon Consultants, and as John mentioned, the Project Manager for the Environmental Impact Report as a consultant to the City of SLO. So I'm going to talk briefly about the environmental review process for this project, where we're at, the purpose of our hearing this evening, and the next steps for the project environmental impact report. The project EIR is being prepared pursuant to the requirements of California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. An EIR is the most comprehensive and detailed level of environmental review available under CEQA, However, the scope of the review is limited to the physical environmental effects of the project. The EIR doesn't evaluate potential social or economic effects. Any concerns regarding the social or economic effects of the project are limited to the project approval process, which will be the subject of future Planning Commission and City Council hearings. Next slide, John. Thank you. The purpose of the EIR is to disclose for the public's consideration the environmental impacts that could result from the project, not to advocate for or against approval of the project, which will ultimately be determined by your commission and the City Council with input from the public. For topics where potential environmental impacts are identified, the EIR also identifies mitigation measures to reduce or eliminate impacts. And finally, the EIR also describes potential alternatives to the proposed project. The purpose of the alternatives discussion is to show conceptual ways to address significant impacts beyond what could be accomplished through required mitigation measures, not to recommend or require any specific change or revision to the project. And once the final EIR is complete, the EIR will have to be certified by the City Council for the proposed project to be approved. So this slide shows the EIR process from start to finish. And I know there's a lot up here, but we've made an effort to highlight where we're at in the process and notably for the public, steps where public input is available into the process. So at this point, the city has prepared a draft EIR for the project and publicly released the draft EIR for review and comment. Once the public review period closes in August, staff will respond to all public and agency comments, and any necessary revisions to the draft EIR will be compiled in a final EIR. If the EIR is certified and the project is approved by the City Council, staff would file a notice of determination with the county clerk. Next slide. So to provide a little context for the draft EIR before the public this evening, the environmental review began with what's referred to as an initial study. The initial study is a screening tool that identifies the key environmental issues for the project and scopes out of the EIR those issues that would not have significant environmental effects or that can be addressed through existing regulatory requirements that the project would already be subject to. The initial study was circulated for a 30-day public review period alongside a notice of preparation at the end of last year. The city received letters from 8 agencies in response to the NOP and the initial study, as well as verbal comments during an EIR scoping meeting held in December 2020. The draft EIR includes all of the NOP comments received and responses to each of those comments indicating where and how that comment is addressed in the draft EIR. Through the NOP and the EIR scoping process, the city determined that there was no substantial evidence to the project and the project would not, there was no substantial evidence that the project would result in significant environmental effects in the areas of aesthetics, agriculture, geology and soils, mineral resources, population and housing, public services, recreation, transportation, and wildfire. And as a result, these environmental topics were scoped out of further evaluation in the draft EIR. I highlight this to note specifically that recent regulatory changes in the CEQA guidelines have eliminated vehicle congestion as a physical environmental impact under CEQA, and the initial study determination that transportation effects would be less than significant is supported by an analysis of the project's vehicle miles traveled prepared by Central Coast Transportation Consultants and reviewed for completeness and accuracy by the city's public works staff. The overall project documentation still does include a complete transportation impact analysis that reviews the effect the project may have on the city's transportation system, but that analysis is no longer part of the CEQA process. Next slide. The purpose of this slide is to show the range of environmental topics that are considered in detail in the draft EIR based on the findings of the initial study that I described in the previous slide. These environmental issues, which are not significantly, these include environmental issues which are not significantly impacted by the project, as well as those for which mitigation is required, and topics where the draft EIR identifies significant and unavoidable environmental effects, which are shown on the next slide. The 2 environmental topics for which the draft EIR identifies significant and unavoidable or Class 1 environmental effects are greenhouse gas emissions and hazards. And I'll talk a little bit about each here and the reasoning behind that. For greenhouse gas emissions, the draft EIR concluded that the project's GHG emissions may exceed the thresholds of significance established by the city's climate action plan. This potential impact would result in the requirement for the project to complete a GHG reduction plan, which is identified in the draft EIR as mitigation measure GHG-1A. But for a full understanding of this impact, I do want to highlight that city staff are currently conducting excuse me, are currently conducting a review of the project's consistency with the city's recently adopted climate action plan, and a final determination from that evaluation could alter the draft EIR conclusion and/or mitigation requirements on this topic. The analysis and conclusion in the draft EIR represents a conservative initial evaluation of the project's potential GHG impact, and any change that would result from staff's review of the project's consistency with the climate action plan would reduce, not increase, the severity of the GHG impact that's identified in the draft EIR that's out for public review right now. For hazards, the draft EIR concluded that the project would contribute additional pedestrian demand to the Tank Farm Road corridor, which has an existing documented pedestrian safety deficiency. The mitigation identified for this impact is a set of specific actions, including a fair share contribution toward future construction of a shared use pedestrian and bicycle path along the north side of Tank Farm Road from Santa Fe Road west. As indicated on this slide, the draft EIR is still required to identify the maximum feasible mitigation for significant and unavoidable impacts, but because these two impacts can't be feasibly mitigated below thresholds of significance, the impacts are identified as significant and unavoidable in the draft EIR, consistent with the CEQA guidelines and the Public Resources Code. And with the exception of these two impacts, all of the other environmental effects of the project were found to be either less than significant or able to be reduced below the applicable thresholds of significance with required mitigation. So here we see a summary of the major environmental topics evaluated in the draft EIR, for which mitigation would reduce potential impacts below thresholds of significance. And the required mitigation for these topics include measures like valley fever suppression measures, air toxics control measures that are consistent with slow APCD requirements, pre-construction surveys for special status animals, construction best management practices to protect special status plants and animals, completion of a jurisdictional delineation and habitat mitigation and monitoring plan, archaeological monitoring and paleontological monitoring during project construction, preparation of a soils management plan, and construction-related noise reduction measures, as well as the GHG reduction program and the actions to facilitate future construction of the ped and bike path on Tank Farm Road that I discussed on the last slide. This slide shows the environmental topics that were identified as having less than significant impacts, not requiring additional mitigation. And please note that the list of less than significant effects also does include the topics that I noted in the earlier slide regarding the initial study, which were scoped out from further review as part of that phase of the environmental review, including transportation. The initial study and its supporting documentation is included as an appendix to the draft EIR, and the findings of the initial study are summarized in section 4.11 of the draft EIR. So as I mentioned in an earlier slide, the draft EIR includes a discussion of potential project alternatives. The purpose of the alternatives analysis is to show conceptual ways to address these significant impacts of the project that would go beyond required mitigation measures, not for consideration as possible options for approval. The draft EIR doesn't evaluate every possible alternative under the sun. The idea is to review a reasonable range of potential alternatives that would generally meet the objectives of the project as identified in the draft EIR project description. The draft EIR addresses this requirement in two steps. First, there's a discussion of alternatives that were considered but rejected because they're clearly infeasible or would fail to meet the basic project objectives. These include alternative locations or other types of projects that are fundamentally different from what the applicant has proposed. Second, there's a detailed discussion of three alternatives that met the basic thresholds for feasibility and consistency and would meet most of the basic project objectives. These include a no-build scenario where no project is approved and nothing new is constructed on the site, an existing land use designation scenario where the project site is built out but under the existing business park land use designation, and a climate action plan consistent alternative which is predicated on key assumptions regarding the outcome of the city's climate action plan consistency review, including specific components of the project that could be modified or reduced to assure consistency with the climate action plan if required. It should be noted that, as I mentioned earlier, the ultimate outcome of the city's review of the project's consistency with the climate action plan could result in changes to this section of the analysis in the final EIR. And based on the alternatives analysis in the draft EIR, that climate action plan consistent alternative, alternative 3, was determined to be the environmentally superior alternative. Thank you. So with that summary of the draft EIR topics and conclusions, I'd like to close by reiterating the focus of tonight's hearing on the project. We're here to hear and document public comments on the draft EIR, including environmental impacts documented in the EIR, any technical issues that reviewers have noted, mitigation measures identified to address potential impacts, and any other items related to the environmental analysis and conclusions. We're requesting that commenters help us by focusing their comments on the draft EIR rather than on their views of the merits of the project itself. The project and its components will be the subject of future hearings with both the Planning Commission and the City Council once comments related to the environmental review have been addressed in the final EIR, including responses to public comments. And all comments received in writing during the public comment period and heard verbally in tonight's hearing will have written responses included in the final EIR alongside any modifications or revisions to the draft EIR necessary to fully address the public's comments, questions, and recommendations. And with that, I'll hand the presentation back over to John.
Thank you, Chris. And along those lines, I'd like to point out that we have received a few, 2 or 3 letters so far on the project, which are going to be responded to in the final EIR. We also received a little bit of correspondence today, including one letter from the applicant, which generally requested that certain aspects of the staff report be clarified where there were errors. So I just want to make sure that's understood for the record and doesn't materially change what the EIR says. There were issues that were raised in there too, and those are things that, again, we don't want to respond to that or anything else specifically except for to clarify at this point, but we will be responding to all that in the context of the final EIR. So I want to make sure we get that out on the record. The next step in the process is the current public review period goes through August 3rd. That's a 50-day review period. 45 days are required, so it actually is a slight extension over that. And then at that point, we'll take all the comments that have been received, and Chris and his group will be preparing the final EIR, and the city will be reviewing, and we'll have that out on the street for general use in making a decision on the project. The final EIR is essentially just the responses to comments and any corrections that may arise in the draft EIR to the final EIR as a result of the comments received. Later on, once we have that, Planning Commission and City Council will consider the final EIR as they consider project approval. So there's still a ways ahead in the process to get to consideration of the project itself. So also for the public's benefit, just want to make sure everyone understands the way to submit comments. Again, need to do it by midnight, August 3rd. And you can do that by speaking here tonight or submitting a written comment at tonight's meeting or writing a letter or an email. And if you do send those, I do have Kyle Bell's name and address and email address up on the screen right now, and that's who you want to send those to at the city. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, to take over from here.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. So are there any questions from commissioners of staff? I don't see any microphones turned on. I don't see anybody here. Yes, please.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Commissioner Handy.
I had a clarification question on what the EIR said about the grading of the site. There's apparently a significant slope from the north east to the southwest, and you talked about 5 feet increments of grading that would happen. And I wondered, is the whole site going to be graded, or what is the time element between phase 1 and phase 2, and is the grading done in that way too, in 2 parts? Because the draft EIR talks about some of the possibilities when the soil is disturbed. I think there was asbestos and other things that were noted. So I just wanted clarification on how the grading is going to happen.
Good question, and I think maybe the best way to do that is to ask Steve Peck to come up here from the applicant team to explain exactly how that would be addressed.
Well, we could, hold off just for a second, would you please? Steve will be making a presentation, so maybe if you wouldn't mind making that part of your presentation. Yeah, and that way we'll finish with staff questions first, otherwise we'll be bouncing back and forth. So we'll wait to hear an answer to the question. It's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Commissioner Khan.
Yeah, is this a condominium subdivision? It's for units, all the units are for sale, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're all for sale units.
Okay,
That's
thank
correct.
you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Shoresman.
I asked you this earlier today, and I think you said that you would follow up and see if you could get an answer, and it's not directly about the EIR, it's more about the approval process from as it's been so far and going forward. And my question to you was, it doesn't appear that this project will come before the Active Transportation Committee again. You mentioned that it would go to the Tree Committee and to the Architectural Review Commission, but considering the traffic, pedestrian, and bike implications, I was curious if that could be added to the process or why it was excluded.
Do you want to answer that?
Sure. Just in terms of why it wasn't included, it's just not a part of our normal development review process to include the Active Transportation Committee on a project like this. We did get direction from council initially to go to the ATC to get some feedback. We did that. We got, I think, 15 items or so that they asked to see further information about or changes to, and so we have a record of that, and we'll be responding to that as this moves forward.
So there's the answer. Yes, Commissioner Dandeker.
I just want another clarification. We received the comments from Mr. Peck, and it's my understanding that what you just said was that these elements would be addressed. Is that correct in the draft EIR?
We received a letter, and so I think it makes sense. It's the prudent thing to respond to that in the framework of the final EIR. Most of the comments on that are really clarifications of issues that are in the staff report and aren't really CEQA related, but there are a couple that are germane to the EIR and I think are easily responded to in that framework.
Are we good? So this is time for the consultant presentation. Mr. Peck?
It's been a long time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Pleasure to look you all in the eye. One thing about Zoom is that we tend to be sort of random faces on a screen, but you really don't get any real face time. So it's a pleasure to be here again. To Commissioner Dandekar's question, if you remember the phasing map that was presented, the middle of the site will be graded first. There is a substantial grade on it. There is a old hard rock quarry on the piece called the Flower Mound, the northwest corner. That will not be graded. There'll be some units graded into that, but the grading in that area is relatively minor. So the middle of the site's going to be graded. The very front of the site will be graded in phase one to make way for the Tank Farm road improvements. And the area along Santa Fe will be graded to make way for those improvements. But the northernmost part of the site will be later on. The southernmost part of the site will be later on. So as you look at those grading numbers, those will be divided up into multiple phases. In fact, it may be each building may be its own little phase, but we know from a construction standpoint that we need to do the Santa Fe extension, kind of that east-west street that's going to connect over to 650 Tank Farm with a bike and ped connection. That'll be done first. There's some fire access issues for that purpose. So the middle of the site, which is, it's not flat, but it's pretty manageable, is the easiest part. When you sort of get into the back of the site, that's when it starts getting terraced, where all the construction materials are stored. So that will be later on. So if that answers your question, though, thank you. First, I'd like to thank the consultants and staff for getting us to this point today. It's been a while. We've been before you a couple times before. This is the first substantive item. We're here to speak on the draft EIR, not to advocate for individual project items. And there are 3 or 4 items that that I'd like to emphasize. The first is the outcome of CEQA traffic study. I think this is the first project where the SB 743 requirements are being applied, and we're divorcing the LOS part of it to the VMT part of it. And the results are quite interesting and illuminating. In this particular case, according to Table 3 of the traffic study and Appendix E of the draft EIR, because we're actually adding dwelling units to a job-rich environment, the regional VMT is actually negative. So the traffic study is telling us what we think is happening, is that rather than people living in Santa Maria and Orcutt and Paso, they'll have an opportunity to live here. So that commuter that is working in Mind Body is going to be living across the street rather than across the county. That's what the traffic study tells us. That's an interesting conclusion that we want to note. The second is water use. As we enter another drought year, we know that there'll be questions about water use. It's important to note that this city is one of the most water secure on the Central Coast, if not in California. They've got redundancy on top of redundancy. And the important thing to note is that the calculations that are presented in the EIR are actually a baseline from 1999 that would predate all the Cal Green requirements, all the recycled water requirements that you have for commercial and multifamily properties, and all the 2019 and 2016 and 2013 water conservation. So if you simply apply what the city has been reporting as residential water use to this project, it's actually about a third of what's represented in EIR. So we'll use water for sure, but the city is very secure, and the actual impact is somewhat less. Third, we know that the bike path on Tank Farm has been an issue. We identified that early on, as did the council, and the EIR identifies this as an existing circulation deficiency and a potential safety issue. The EIR recommends mitigations such as safety warnings, development of planning and construction documents, and right-of-way acquisition. That doesn't result necessarily with this project in the construction of a bike path, but our share of that traffic is about 1%, and we think we're going to be sort of moving that ball 75% down the field. Good progress towards completion is something the community's needed for a while. Finally, the no project alternative versus a project alternative that was referenced by Chris is an important matter to consider. It boils down to either developing the site under existing zoning with about 225,000 to 250,000 additional square feet of office and commercial, and another 1,000 commuters, and increasing VMT by 20 to 30,000, or developing the project as proposed as 280 smaller sized dwelling units and reducing VMT by 7,000 miles per day. And the relative air quality, traffic, and GHG impacts of the project and no project alternative correspond to these differences. So simply amplifying information that's already in the EIR. And with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there questions of the consultant? I'm not seeing any.
Thank you.
Deputy City Clerk, are there comments requested from the public? So the one person we have listed is Lee Brooks. Please come up.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is very weird and wonderful to be in person again. So I'm Leah Brooks. I'm a resident of San Luis Obispo. I recently termed off the Active Transportation Committee, but was a member a year ago when the committee reviewed the conceptual design for this project and provided 21 directional items regarding bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and safety. I am so pleased to see the ATC's recommendations integrated into this project. I'm also disappointed that the DER is not being routed to the ATC for review, just as Commissioner Shorsman said. It was my understanding that City Council directed staff to do so and not just for a scoping session. I am here to express concern that the draft EIR has found the project will result in significant and unavoidable impacts related to greenhouse gas emissions and is a potential hazard to pedestrians. Without a bike or multimodal path proposed as mitigation along the north side of Tank Farm Road through the Chevron property, we're left with a substandard, poorly maintained shoulder that separates pedestrian and bicyclists from heavy traffic with a faded, painted white line. I bicycle Tank Farm at least once a week because it's the primary connection between Broad and Higuera. I sometimes encounter pedestrians who are typically walking with traffic rather than against, so they can't see bicyclists approaching from the rear. This forces bicyclists into the travel lane or slow down or stop. Not a comfortable position to be on a narrow shoulder next to traffic, waiting for a gap and then having to speed up to proceed. The city has approved project after project, including San Luis, Avila, Froome Ranch, the Margarita and Orchid areas, after overriding significant environmental impacts, acknowledging increases in vehicle traffic and greenhouse gases. How do you expect people to switch car trips by bike or foot when their choice is Tank Farm and Buckley roads that are clearly not perceived as safe and definitely not pleasant? Uncertainty regarding right-of-way for the bike path is not an acceptable excuse. The applicant cannot be expected to foot the bill for sidewalks and a full Class 1 bike path. The city needs to take on this responsibility. And seriously, I'm almost done. Sal Cortez was killed on South Higuera Street on June 25th after a semi-truck ran over him. His death and risk to other bicyclists and pedestrians should not be considered collateral damage as a price for development. Continuing to approve development that puts bicyclists and pedestrians at risk is not okay, especially when the city is encouraging active transportation. We need infrastructure now, not years down the road, if ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. So I believe that's all of the public comment. I'm ready to turn it back to the commission for its comments. Who would like to start? Everybody's jumping at once. Mr. Wilkin, Commissioner Wilkin.
Okay, thank you. I have a few comments. First of all, regarding Mr. Peck's letter, I had questions that I think Mr. Peck's letter answered about the R3 and R4, which was called an occupancy group in the EIR, but it was really apparently not. So I think the EIR should be correct, the final EIR should be corrected in that regard, and should state that there's no residential care or assisted living facilities that are proposed, because I think that would change the design of the project compared to residential. And so the EIR should say that the residential buildings would be townhomes and stacked flats. And I think it should also state that they will be, they're intended to be for sale units, because that will make a difference as far as the requirements for private open space, I believe. I think if I'm not mistaken, condominiums require a certain amount of private open space per unit, which means that I think this means that the mixed-use units would have to have private open space, and so that would be a potential noise consideration. So I would suggest addressing that in the draft EIR. If I'm mistaken on that, please let me know. But I think if the mixed-use units are also condominiums, they would need private open space for each unit. Okay, so I do have some comments on hazards. And I'll start off with a couple of questions, and this was referenced in Mr. Peck's comments. It has to do with Has-3 mitigations regarding the off-site bike path. And I wanted to know whether there's two mitigation measures. They're in paragraphs B and C. They require the applicant to contribute to a design of the bike path and also to acquire right-of-way for about almost a mile of bike path. And I wanted to know if the applicant is expected to fund that in the mitigation measure. It's not really clear, or would the applicant be reimbursed if they do upfront some money? Because as I read the mitigation, this is in addition to the requirement for the applicant to participate in the TIF, or Transportation Impact Fee. I think that's what the acronym stands for. So I guess that's a question for staff.
Let's pause, Director.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Jorgensen, members of the commission. That would be, there's a mitigation measure that includes a variety of steps that are an obligation of the project to pursue. Even though it is identified, the particular impact associated with that bike path is identified as a significant and unavoidable impact. And as the speaker during public comment mentioned, the City Council adopts findings of overriding consideration from time to time. Even for projects that are considered that have these Class 1 impacts, they're significant and unavoidable. That doesn't mean that there's no mitigation that occurs. All feasible mitigation is still applied wherever possible in order to reduce those impacts. However, in this case, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being that the Tank Farm Road right-of-way is outside the city limits and still part of county jurisdiction, but also that we don't control the ownership of land that's necessary for the build-out of Tank Farm Road. This is still considered a significant and unavoidable impact, the fact that the bike path may not exist when the project is occupied. But this project will further our ability as a city to deliver that piece of infrastructure far beyond what could occur without it. Because obviously this project includes the improvement of the Tank Farm Road and Santa Fe roundabout, including the transition over into county right-of-way to the 2-lane segment of Tank Farm Road, but also will pursue all these other steps to move us down the path towards, excuse the pun, delivering the bike path. And the obligations of this developer are fair share. They're not expected to foot the bill for those items, and they have actually a very small percentage of what the overall impact and requirement is for the costs associated with the bike path, but they're actually going to do a lot to help us deliver it. It's an important piece of infrastructure, probably the most important in the bike plan that's still, out there for us to build.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I'm sorry if I missed it. Are you saying that the applicant's contribution is to be entirely through the TIF contribution to the TIF, or in addition, above and beyond the TIF, is the applicant expected to acquire right-of-way and design the bike path? I guess that's my question. Is it something in addition to the TIF contribution? And if so, does the applicant get reimbursed, or are they footing the bill of those, which I think would be substantial?
Yeah, we're actually negotiating that as part of a reimbursement agreement, and they do have some obligations beyond just the transportation impact fee. But actually, they're probably not going to pay transportation impact fees because they are actually building the infrastructure. So for those other projects that occurred along the Tank Farm Road segment here, we collected transportation impact fees. We're using those transportation impact fees to support our capital improvement plan and to build projects in this area. But in this case, this project is actually building this intersection, this roundabout. And it's expected then that those expenses will offset their requirement to pay any fees associated with the trip generation of the project.
Okay. All right. So since the funding is maybe a little bit uncertain at this point or being negotiated, I'll just say that if the applicant's being required to fund the acquisition of right-of-way and design the bike path, then I would say that would be an unreasonable mitigation. And I don't think it was required of the project next door, 650, which has a similar amount of units and would theoretically have the same or similar impact on pedestrians. And having said that, I kind of question whether the impact on pedestrians is a true hazard, significant unavoidable hazard. I'm not sure how many pedestrians are going to be walking from this project to the South Agara area on Tank Farm. Maybe some, but I kind of question whether that's really a significant unavoidable impact to begin with. So that's my comment on that. And then I did have another comment on hazards, and it has to do with fire emergency access. I don't think this was addressed in the EIR. And the issue that I think the EIR should consider discussing is the connection to the east through 650 Tank Farm, or to the north out from that project to the north through to industrial, and whether that connection needs to be in place before a certain amount of units can be developed on this site for emergency access, because after all the access from these 280 units would be taken from a real narrow segment of Tank Farm, about there's two driveways, but they're within 250 feet of each other. So all the access would go out there if it weren't for 650 Tank Farm next door. And it also, the furthest units away from Tank Farm are about 1,000 feet. So you have units that are distant from Tank Farm, and there's also just really two access points that are close together. So I would suggest the draft EIR address anyway the issue of emergency access and to 650 Tank Farm at least, if not out to industrial for a completely second route out of the project in case of an emergency or for an emergency vehicle. Really, those are my comments on the draft EIR.
Thank you. Are there other comments? Commissioner Shoresman.
Thank you. I have a couple comments, and it might lead to a question. We'll see. I had some confusion over the same section of the EIR that Commissioner Wilkin discussed, the mitigation measures on HAZ-3 A through C. I'm still not sure I totally understand the answer, so maybe one improvement suggestion for the EIR would be to make clearer exactly how the applicant participates in those items B and C that Commissioner Wilkin spoke of, where it talks about designing a path or being part of the design process for the path, as well as exhausting all reasonable efforts working with the city, county, and private landowners to acquire the right-of-way. So maybe that section could be made a little bit clearer. Overall, I am not a frequent reader of these documents before being on the commission, but I did feel like, in general, it was a really well-written document, and I appreciated how it referenced many of the important policies related to, bicycle use and complete streets, and it was a good reminder of what we're looking at in terms of what the overall goals of the project are and how the project is meeting them or not. I continue to be pretty concerned about the two areas that are listed as significant and unavoidable that have been discussed a little bit already. We've talked about the transportation and impact on pedestrian and bike users in that area. I realize that the vehicle miles traveled formula doesn't really fit into this into the scenario the way it's written about in the draft EIR, the way it's written. But I still do have concerns about that area. I echo Leah Brooks' comments about how dangerous that corridor is, both for pedestrians and bicycles. And I think that bringing those three projects that are going to be in that area to fruition before there's, additional improvements made to Tank Farm will be dangerous. People will cross. There will be more people crossing the streets there and using alternative forms of transportation to get around. And I'm overall just concerned about that and would like to see, some more clarity about how we can mitigate those new dangers, as well as the GHG emissions. I had some conversations with staff today about the climate action plan and how the changes in the climate action plan, or the newly adopted climate action plan, may make this project a little bit more feasible, may reduce some of the problems from significant and unavoidable to a lesser level. But I'm a little bit concerned with the fact that seems like it's just sort of moving the goalpost a little bit, making it won't be because the project is required to do more or to mitigate its impacts, but it will just mean that how do I explain this? It's made the measure that we're trying to meet higher. So I think those are. Oh, and then I would like to just mention again a recommendation or a comment that I believe that the project should go to the Active Transportation Committee one more time. Those are my comments.
Anybody else?
Just wanted to maybe clarify one point that I think Commissioner Wilkin made about the subdivision requirements. So just so it's clear for the record that common interest subdivisions only require common open space. And for airspace subdivisions, there is no common or private or otherwise open space required at all. So I think that's just something that will be evaluated as the project moves forward through the process, but just thought that would be important to note.
Could I just follow up on that? So just for my clarification, so there is, I thought there was a 100 square foot requirement of open space per unit. So for what kind of projects are those for? For the what kind of subdivisions require 100 square foot of private open space per unit? I thought it was for condominiums.
There isn't one. That was a requirement that used to exist that doesn't, it's not a part of our current ordinance.
All right. Thanks.
Most of my concerns, I think, have been commented on already. I'm still also concerned about the hazards of bike and possibly pedestrian travel along that area, and just, I guess, frustrated in a sense that while we have some climate action goals, there's still an awful lot of work to do the calculations and try to work through what that actually means when we've got big projects coming. So in a way, we're kind of stuck for the time being, and it is, to me, disappointing that we can't quite look at the impacts and figure out some mitigations. And right now, I take it that's a work in progress. So I'm hoping for some outcomes that take the active transportation needs of that whole region, that part of the city, more strongly into account before we're through all these three projects. That's my 2 bits. So those are our comments. That's really all we have to do on this item tonight. We're all done? Thank you. Thank you. The next item is item 4B. It's a review of a conditional use permit for a new cannabis retail storefront at 3535 South Higuera Street. And we would like to have a staff report. Looks like Kyle's getting it, huh?
Let's get into the situation real quick. Let
a loud microphone. Okay. All set? Okay. Okay, getting used to all these rule changes. It's still figuring it out. Okay. Good evening. My name is Kyle Bell, Associate Planner. I'm covering tonight for Kyle Van Leeuwen, who's an Associate Planner with our division. He's out of the office today, so I'll be covering for him. Tonight we'll be reviewing the conditional use permit for a new cannabis retail storefront in the service commercial zone. Tonight's recommendation is to approve the project and adopt the draft resolution to grant the use permit, subject to the findings and conditions for consistency with the general plan and zoning regulations. The project site is located along South Higuera Street, mid-block between Prado and Granada intersections, with direct access along the South Higuera frontage road. The project site is located in the service commercial zone within the Higuera Commerce Park specific plan and cannabis business zone overlay. The project site is surrounded by commercial service uses to the north, east, south, and west. The existing site is developed with 2 commercial structures that were previously occupied by an auto repair shop, and the existing structures are proposed to remain on site. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the conditional use permit, which is required by the California Bureau of Cannabis Control to issue a Type 10 storefront retail license. The applicant has previously been approved for the commercial cannabis operation permit on March 23rd, 2020. The project is also subject to a minor development review application for the exterior building and site improvements, including signage and lighting. The minor development review application is subject to a separate review process from the conditional use permit this evening. The operational permit for this location stipulates that the applicant must begin operation prior to the expiration date, which is set for December 23rd, 2021. The project is proposed in 2 phases to provide sufficient time to begin operation and comply with the operational permit requirements. Phase 1 would provide adequate time to convert Building 1 into a temporary retail space by December 23rd, 2021, while Building 2 is still under construction. Phase 1 of the project consists of utilizing the existing building along the front of the property, shown on the screen as Building 1. Phase 1 will utilize the existing 5 parking spaces along the front of the property for customer parking and provide for deliveries in the rear of the property behind a 6-foot tall rolling security gate. Building 1 will be modified to provide 386 square feet of retail space and 215 square feet of employee areas for storage and restrooms. Phase 2 of the project, which is the final phase, will include the completed improvements of Building 2 to provide approximately 2,000 square feet of retail space and 1,150 square feet of office space along the second floor mezzanine. Building 1 will be converted back into an office space as an employee break room, and the project site will be developed to provide for 18 vehicle parking spaces and associated landscaping improvements. Prior to the hearing this evening, the agenda correspondence was received that indicated that a youth center was located next door to the project subject property. We thought that it would be important to note that the cannabis ordinance specifically states that youth centers do not require a buffer from cannabis retail storefronts, and furthermore, the youth center in question has not yet been approved for the site next door, pending a business license issuance. The applicant provided a map demonstrating compliance with the buffer requirements for a cannabis storefront use, which they will cover in more detail during their presentation this evening. And this actually concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Are there questions of staff?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I didn't.
Mr. Hopkins.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
All right. I wanted to clarify. I didn't see any variances or exceptions or anything that they're requesting, and I wanted to confirm that everything was fully compliant, essentially, with the CUP in that regard. Correct. There was no exceptions or variances requested as part of this project. Great. Thank you.
Commissioner Welken.
Thank you. Does the staff have access to a list of licensed daycare providers?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so I presume that was checked then?
Yes.
To conclude that there are none within the buffer area?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. And maybe this question is better answered by the applicant, but I'll ask it now. I saw somewhere on the plans a roll-up door that looked like it was located in the middle of building number 2, and I was wondering what the purpose of that was. There is a roll-up door for the delivery area in building 2 on the right side, but then right in the middle of the building, it looked like there's a roll-up door, and I was just wondering what the purpose of that is.
I'll let the applicant touch on this a little bit more, but I believe that is an opaque window system, and it's not actually a rolling door, but I'll let the applicant confirm that during their presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask about security just for a minute? So a security plan is required. Is a security plan in full operation for the first phase as well? Obviously, for the second phase, I assume it would be.
Yes, and full compliance with the operational permit will be required for phase 1, and then ultimately for phase 2 as well.
And so what does the security plan require in terms of fencing? Let's, for instance, on the north side of the parcel facing the potential use center.
On the north side, fencing along the property line between the 2 sites.
Mm-hmm. I see a property line marker on the map, but I don't see.
I might have to get back to you on that one.
I can answer that a little bit. I mean, just in terms of having reviewed the security plans for the other 2, cannabis retail sales stores in the city, there really aren't specific site fencing provisions required. If you think of the 2 sites, the one on Broad Street and the one on High-Garra Street in the mid-High-Garra area near High Street, the sites are open to the public in terms of parking and pedestrian circulation in front of and to the buildings. So along, the northern property line, it would be normal property line fencing that would exist as part of the security plan. What the police department, who evaluates and has to actually authorize and approve each security plan, what they're looking for is ensuring that the buildings themselves are secure, and that the site has appropriate surveillance, and that all of the mechanisms for taking delivery and for delivering happen in a secure and controlled way. So it's about more the sort of chain of custody of the merchandise, and that overnight that the merchandise is able to be secured in a vault, and that that video surveillance occurs. But I wouldn't expect anything specific in terms of property line fence, but that might be something that the property owner elects to do and would be able to discuss in their presentation.
There weren't fences called out on the site plans. That's why I was asking.
Just to add on to that, Kyle pulled up a slide here that shows the project plans, and there is an existing 8-foot-high block wall between the buildings along the property line.
I guess I didn't make a copy of that part of it. Good, that's good to know. So if we're done, Commissioner Welken.
Yeah, sorry, one more question for staff. I know that the retail storefronts need to be located on an arterial street, and this is a frontage street, which I'm presuming is considered part of the right-of-way of South Higuera. It's one continuous right-of-way. I think there's a little island or something with some landscaping in between the frontage street and South Higuera, but staff's considering that all as an arterial, I presume, right?
Yeah, that is correct. The landscaping area is a median.
And that's public right-of-way, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it's essentially all part of the right-of-way of South Agara then? Okay.
So are we ready then to hear from the applicant? That would be the time.
All right. Good evening. My name is Jen Brennan. I work with 10 Over Studio here in town. And just to run through this quickly, just because it sounds like there are a few questions regarding the security. There are 2 buildings on the site. I'll scroll through what we've seen already. This is the buffer map. There are 2 existing buildings on the site. For phase 1, we are going to have this rolling security gate that can be locked and closed for deliveries. But all of the video monitoring and other security devices will be put on the site during phase 1 to cover surveillance of the entire site during deliveries overnight. Like some of the planners said, there is an 8-foot-high wall on this north side of the property, as well as this is a 20-foot plus high adjacent building on this edge of the property. So it's a very secure site once the rolling locked gate is locked for deliveries. Let's see. We also have surveillance inside of the buildings per the requirements for cannabis dispensaries. This will continue to remain in place once during phase 2 it is converted back into an office building. And then for phase 2, all of the security is already in place, the site surveillance, but instead of deliveries being made behind this locked rolling gate, there's actually a delivery bay inside of the rear building. And that is the use of the rolling door here. The truck can drive in, the rolling gate will be shut, and the delivery truck will be entirely secure. While I'll scroll through to a floor plan. So here's the delivery bay, the rolling door that can be locked and closed. That leads to an intake room and then the secure vault. So that's how the security works here. Other than that, I want to thank Kyle for running through this, but if you have any questions, I'm available. And we have the owner here tonight also, Austin Canella, if you have any questions for him when that's appropriate.
Go ahead. Yes. Did you have an answer on the question about the overhead rolling door in the middle of the building? I thought I saw that correctly on one of the plans. I don't remember which one. If it's there, what's the purpose of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. You sit here and work on a project for a year. Our thought with this was for resale for ventilation into this large area. It could be a secure space if the rolling door in between the 2 parking lot areas was closed. But if we needed to have a condition to change that to a storefront, we certainly could at this point. We just thought it would be a nice feature to have some ventilation in there.
see any. I'll bring it back to the commission then. So, comments, motions, not emotions, just motions. Go ahead, Michael.
I'll make a motion to approve. Seems to meet every requirement in terms of location, zoning, being compliant with all of the existing additional requirements for a cannabis operator as well. So, yeah, I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll go ahead and second it, but then I have an amendment to propose to the, or a condition to propose to the resolution. Kyle, if you want to bring it up. I ran some language by Kyle earlier to add an item. My concern, it's minor. I have really no reservations about this project in general. The one thing that I was concerned about was the location of the bike racks that appear to be sort of behind the, in the current plan, they're sort of behind the first building in the first phase. And so I worked with Kyle to craft this language to bring those bicycle racks into a more convenient, safe, and accessible location in front of the two buildings. I don't know, should I read it or do you guys want to just look at it? So I would propose adding this condition if my fellow commissioners are agreeable.
Let's try with Commissioner Hopkins first. Can you accept the amendment?
Yeah, I just wanted to first maybe check in with the applicant, make sure there's no big concerns or anything there first.
It's a good idea.
Okay, then,
Okay.
yeah, I'm amenable to the amendment.
Comments on that, on the amendment or on the motion? Commissioner Wilkin.
Thank you. I agree that the project seems to meet all the applicable requirements, and landscaping plan seems nicely designed. This looks like a secure site. I had just a lingering question about the roll-up door as far as security, and I just wanted to make sure that the police department in their review of the security plan is aware that there's a roll-up door being proposed, because it's hard to spot on the plans unless you really review them carefully. And so I just wanted to make sure that it's referred to the police department, or the police department is aware that that's part of the plan. I mean, if the police department's fine with it, I'm fine with it.
Okay, well, they are part of the process all the way, through to occupancy and opening to the public. So it's not something that will slip by them, but we'll make the point to call it out. They will review the security plan, but they'll also review the building plans for consistency with the security plan, and then they inspect the site before things are allowed to open to the public. So,
Okay, well, with that, I'm in support of the project and the amended condition.
Are we ready to vote? Looks like we are. Deputy City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Hopkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Shorsman.
Yes.
Commissioner Dondekar.
Yes.
Commissioner Khan.
Yes.
Commissioner Wilkin.
Yes.
Vice Chair Quincy.
Yes.
Chair Jorgensen.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So we've passed that motion unanimously with the amendment. So there we are. Thank you. Next item is staff updates. Deputy Director, I like that title. Tyler Corey.
Well, thanks for everyone being here tonight. It's been almost a year and a half, I think, for myself and probably all of you as well. So I think it was good to kind of get a meeting under our belts here to work out some of the details of being back in person. But I think there'll be more information over the next couple weeks in terms of how to make this even better. So I'll be following up with you once I have more discussions with the city clerk. But in terms of outlook and where we're headed from here, our next meeting is on July 28th. And currently we have two items. First item is going to be a continued review of the 500 Westmont subdivision, the 23 lot. proposal there on a 5-acre site. So that'll be coming back with an updated staff report and an environmental document for your consideration. And then we also have the airport hotel. So this is a 3-story hotel, 204 rooms, located out at 990 and 950 Arrow in the business park zone in the airport area specific plan. So this is about 125,000 square feet of commercial hotel space out there. So those are the 2 items set for the 28th, and then the next meeting out, first meeting in August, we have currently 1 item. It's 279 Bridge Street, and this is a development review or design review of a mixed-use project. It's a 100% affordable housing project. It's proposed by Haslo, located in the manufacturing zone, and it's got about 1,000 square feet of commercial that's associated with that. So that will be coming on the 11th. And that's what I have for forecast for tonight. Questions or?
Tyler, I had a question on the Westmont project. We received a letter about the project and a couple of items that the writers thought hadn't been addressed. One was about the frog and so on. So I assume these comments will be reflected on when we come back in the staff report, in the revised.
Sure, it'll be addressed either in the staff report, the presentation, or by the applicant's team. Yeah.
And I just want to highlight, I know there were a few commissioners that weren't able to attend that first meeting. It was noted during public comment that there was an error with the notification, so we wanted to, let you know that we did discover what occurred with that and figured out exactly the situation. So it's going to be a brand new hearing under the circumstances. So we're going to sort of start fresh and make sure everybody has the same information and the same presentation, and we'll be able to answer all of your questions and the public's questions. I think it was good to have the hearing and to hear the input from the commissioners and from the public. So we'll be more prepared to answer those when we come back.
Everyone come to the meeting. Nobody has to go out and get their neighbors and get them into the Zoom and things like that.
Yeah, that was fun.
Good. I'm glad it's playing out that way.
Yeah.
Anything else? I think we're adjourned.